Welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. Here we'll talk to the leaders in technology, culture, business, and the arts. We'll cover politics, advocacy, motherhood, writing, mental health, and mostly we'll focus on hope. Join Kim B. Davis, author, playwright, radio personality, event consultant, professional speaker on the Kim B. Davis Show. Good evening and welcome to the Kim B. Davis Show. I'm your host, Kim B. Davis, and this evening we have our favorite expert guest on the Kim B. Davis Show. Her name is Dr. Angela Celeste May. She is a forensic, organizational, and clinically trained psychologist. She is also president of the Michigan Psychological Association Foundation Board. She is an author. She's a musician, but we love her because she comes on and she helps us break down some important topics. And of course, tonight we are continuing our conversation about policing in Black America and how it impacts our community. Good evening, Dr. Angie. How are you?
Good evening. I am doing very well, very blessed. And it's always a blessing to sit and chat with you. So I'm thrilled to be here as always.
Well, thank you. We are so glad that you're here. So let's get right to it. So it's been about a week and a half since the Derek Chauvin guilty verdict came down. I don't know about you, but I, along with a few people that I know, we all expressed a sense of relief. Not necessarily joy, but relief in the fact that he was found guilty. However, that relief is still sort of hanging on because we don't know what the sentence will be because the sentencing hasn't been handed down. And so we want to see what that looks like. What I want to talk about tonight, because you deal in mental, psychological, and helping us to understand our mental processes. So much of what we saw from 2020 was brutalization on film. We saw George Floyd with a knee on his neck for over 9 minutes. That video has been played and played and played over and over and over again. It has become a meme in certain instances where people have flipped the racial makeup, putting George Floyd in the police officer's uniform and Derek Chauvin as the person who was under arrest. I don't know if you've seen that. I
have not seen that. Wow.
And people were asking the question, if it was reversed, would this have taken as long in terms of criminal procedures and court and getting the justice that this heinous crime deserved, or would we be going through the same thing? I bring all this up because as a mom with two young sons, that they have seen the video. And although I may have tried to shelter them from seeing the brutal aspects of it, it's everywhere. It was on TikTok, it was on Snapchat, it was on every social media app, and people were talking about it everywhere. So Dr. Ian, how do we handle and adding to that, that it seems like every day there's a new video and we've had so many, and we could go on for days about how many different videos we've seen, but how does a video itself impact us, and what does it do to our psyche, or what does it say to our psyche, and then how do we process that?
That's well, first I have to really give you kudos, because when you we were talking about tonight's topic, I really thought it's so important that you're covering it in general, of course, but that you are doing so from an understanding that there is definitely a painful impact on all of us who are being the term that a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists use is that secondary trauma that you're talking about. So important and very, very real. I think that, I know I was glued as much as I was able to, to watching the trial, as so many people were. And one of the things that I know people talked about especially in the early part of the trial, because as folks have said, that prosecution just put on just a I mean, excellent, thoroughly researched, just, brought folks from all different aspects, from the bystanders, to the experts and everything in between, to really make their case. And I know a lot of people talked about in the early part of the trial, when they had those bystanders there, and they talked about how, every, to a person, there were tears, people were just emoting, and that there was definitely trauma to them as well, to the community around them, to people to watch that. And as you say, for those of us who weren't bystanders physically on the street, we too have been bombarded with that. So it's a real thing, the way it impacts us. And so first thing I want your audience to know is that there is a such thing as secondary trauma, that's the term for it. And it means that you may not be the direct victim as far as the aggression being directed toward us, personally, but because we witness it, because we've seen it, like you said, because it's all around us, and we're humans, we're impacted by that. So that's the first thing, that it is a real thing. Second of all, it's amazing how much secondary trauma mimics, I don't want to use the word actual, but how much it mimics the primary, I'll put it that way, primary trauma for a person who's, for George Floyd, for the person who's actually having that aggression on that person and towards that person. And it mimics it in things that will sound a lot like PTSD, post-traumatic stress, syndrome. And that is that the rest of us who've been exposed to it and seen it, and we a lot of times we're more hyper vigilant than we normally might be. And to be vigilant is to look out, right? To watch out. Hypervigilance, that's like on the next level. And hypervigilance and anxiety go hand in hand. So just as you might expect someone who's been through trauma themselves, or who is suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, you might expect them to be hyper vigilant and looking around and extra nervous and have extra anxiety. Those of us who've been traumatized in a secondary way by seeing that also oftentimes experience that. By the same token, depression may increase also, feelings of hopelessness, increased, anxiety and fear go hand in hand, increased feelings of fear. And, that hopelessness and that helplessness, like all of those kinds of feelings can and are brought up within people who, again, we're experiencing that secondary trauma. And you could liken it to oftentimes if anyone who has a friend or relative, or they may be in the social sciences themselves, like social workers or counselors, psychologists. A lot of times when we look at kids, little kids or any age child who is in an abusive home, and we talk about secondary trauma from that perspective, where we now, for many years now, we recognize, we understand that even though a particular child may not have been the recipient of beatings or of abuse or even verbal abuse, those things are damaging also, sometimes more so. Even if that particular child may not be the recipient of that, because that child witnessed it, if it's from spouse to spouse, husband abusing wife or wife abusing husband, it impacts the children. It impacts because they're in that environment. And so a lot of times kids will come into counseling, or, if a teacher's sees something at school and they're seeing the change in the behavior where the child is more distracted or seems more anxious. Again, that's secondary trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very, very real at all ages. And so I kind of liken it to that. It's similar, same kind of thing. Um, so yeah, it definitely impacts us. And that is society wide, I would say. Definitely society wide, just in general, no matter, for the most part, no matter what your own background might be.
Mm-hmm.
Add to that, if we talk about being triggered, triggers, things that may bring up our own, sense of anxiety or depression or whatever the emotion might be based on individual history. So if you add to that people in the population, in the communities, George Floyd was championed and supported around the world. So that means we've seen people in all kinds of societies, with fist up, which I love that, supporting the Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
So add to that people who are watching it, who may themselves have, or be triggered by that because of something in their own lives, some form of abuse at the hands of an authority figure and all of that. So that's like that compounds it on top of it. Then you add to that being the beautiful brown and black shades that we come in as definitely people of color, but most specifically Black folks.
Right.
It's just, it's like, it's just trauma on top of, secondary trauma on top of secondary trauma. And some of your viewers may say, well, why is it extra for Black folks? I mean, it may seem obvious, but I think it bears stating or clarifying, because everyone may not be aware. Even though well, I wouldn't say even though, we live in an age of technology, like we say, where now these painful tragedies are being captured, on cell phones, it's right there handy where you can see what's going on, right? We live in an age where there are police body cams also. So it's being shown and it's being exposed, but I don't think we can say this enough. It is not the least bit new,
Right.
particularly for, in Black, definitely in Black American society. And for so many, we can go back 401 years to the first slave ship coming over, or however you want to think of it, for literally centuries.
Right.
Black people, in particular, Black and brown, but definitely Black people. And when we say brown, we mean Latinx and Native Americans, Indian from India, just all the different backgrounds who are considered non-white, quote unquote. But definitely Black folks have for centuries told these stories, said this is what happened, said this is how, but the police did treat me differently. And, over and over again, consistently have not been heard, not been believed, oftentimes by even well-meaning white folks, or even others for whom that's not a reality. They've never seen that before. I'm just like, oh, come on, are you sure? For it's different reasons. People have denied it for different reasons. Some are aware that it had been aware that it goes on, but didn't want to admit it. Some were prejudiced themselves and therefore wanted it perpetuated, this kind of treatment of Black people. Some people want to distance themselves from that kind of treatment because they may feel some guilt, even if they didn't do it themselves. But there is that kind of like, it's a real thing, that kind of white guilt that by association, I don't want you to think I'm that way. So no, I don't believe that they really, police don't really do that, and it's just not a reality for a lot of people. So I mentioned that part because it's bad enough. It's one thing to have been, have been treated that way, or to have seen that among people that that's traumatizing enough. But then to be told, over and over and over again for too long that this is, like they say, one or two bad apples. This is not really happening to you, to be told is that just makes it even more. It just makes it even worse. So that's the other part, I think, of what's going on right now. In this current past year and a half, 2 years or so. it's really shining a light on something that's already been there. And so the trauma, the emotions, the anger, the frustration of not being believed that these things go on in Black communities, we're seeing all of that also just explode. And by explode, I don't even necessarily mean marching in the streets. I mean explode in terms of exactly what you're talking about. The psychological reactions, the emotional reactions. So yeah, that's the state of things. That's the state. To your question of, you know, how do we address it? I think the first thing is to validate. And I'm very heartened to see that that's what I see people doing, no matter what the background. I mean, you know, one of many ways that this awful tragedy, these tragedies, multiple tragedies, which have been captured, you know, for all to see on video, definitely George Floyd, you know, being perhaps the most graphic. People have started calling it a public lynching. I do not think that that's too extreme, you know, to call that what it is. One of the positive things that have come out of this horrible tragedy has been a new awakening for a lot of people, recognizing that this goes on, and a feeling of a sense of community. I do see people of all different backgrounds lifting each other up and validating, even to the point of saying, you know, publicly, you know, we've seen people say, you know, I didn't realize it was this bad. I didn't know this went on. I did. So that's necessary. That waking up is necessary, and that validating that this goes on. I'll tell you, you know, honest to goodness, I personally have, I don't think I've ever had a negative experience with a police officer. I am a Black woman in a Black Detroiter here in Michigan, United States. I don't think I ever have. But that doesn't mean that I can afford some luxury to pretend that this is not, you know, prevalent and goes on and has gone on and has been sanctioned, quite frankly, by legislatively and, you know, and otherwise. So I think definitely validating it, acknowledging that this goes on, and then also for our kids in particular, because, you know, like you said, you're a mom, you got boys. It is so important, I think, to just let them talk about it, to ask open-ended questions. How are you feeling about all this? And it's so like you said, for parents, it's so tempting. You know, you just want to wrap them up. You want to protect them. You want them to not feel the feelings, like you want them to not feel the pain. And because of that, parents, I think, too often will fall in, even if they try to be open at first and they want to rush in with the answers and kind of, they don't mean any harm, but like tell them how they should feel. You know, start with telling them how they should feel. And I think it's just so important to give space and room to a safe space, you know, where it's like, okay, you know, you are allowed to just, I want you to be honest, just whatever you feel, how are you feeling, let them talk about it, let them share about it. And I think that's a great opportunity for learning for parents as well as for kids. That's very, very important, because for all ages, it's important for all ages to, you know, find that person in your life, person you trust, person that you feel you can just kind of vent with, somebody that's going to hear you. It may be someone in your personal life or family. If you feel you don't have that, you could always, you know, walk down the road to the nearest church that you don't belong to and walk in and take a moment, ask to talk to the clerk or whomever. But talking about that and getting your honest feelings out, and admitting, you know, modeling the behavior as well. And by that, I mean, for each other and definitely for our kids, letting them know that we all, you know, it's scary for all of us. That is a scary thing. It's a painful thing. Sometimes I know parents are a little nervous about walking that fine line, depending on, well, no matter what age of your kids, but definitely when they're younger, because, you know, we're their shelter, their stronghold. You don't want to tell them that mommy's scared or daddy's, afraid, but you can say it in ways that may not, you want to be honest, but at the same time, especially for maybe the smaller ones, older ones can perhaps handle that conversation at that level, but smaller ones, giving them an opportunity to talk about how they feel, let them know that you understand, let them know that a lot of people feel that way, even adults. And of course, a lot of times kids will ask, well, mommy, daddy, have you felt? You can say, I have felt afraid too. I know what it's like to feel afraid. There's a difference between saying, I know what it's like and I understand, I really understand how you feel. And sometimes we can, that's one, there's a difference between that and, well, yes, daddy and mommy are terrified right now. We don't know what we're going to do tomorrow. No, we don't want terrified babies.
Right. Right.
Right. Not for the little ones. Not, so yeah, definitely. So you're being honest. You're letting them know, what that feels like. You're letting them know it's important to talk about it. You can always talk about it with us anytime. Let us know how you feel. Let them know that that they are loved and safe with you, right there, kind of thing. And then, like you said, for the ones that are a bit older, like your sons, maybe, that we all get, it's true, we all get scared. We all get scared, but it's natural. It makes sense, to feel this way. It's a natural reaction, and then that can be like a learning space after that. Well, one is a reiteration of your faith.
Yeah.
What do we do with these feelings? The power of prayer, the power of that community, and by that I mean even just like within your home, the prayer time together, the devotion, the leaning on the belief, leaning on the rock that we call our God, all of those things, and these are the times, at the scariest times when we really, really step into that. And, I can, I'm sure you can as well. I can tell you as an adult, in the scariest of moments, I think back to, I remember grandma walking that floor with that Bible, honey, talking to her God and I know God's going to take, we remember that stuff. I don't care how old you are. You 85 and you remember when it was your great grandma. So we past that, we're passing that, pass that on to our kids, as they say, and as psychological research has shown. I can't remember if I mentioned this before or not, but I think I did at least one other time, that like in terms of communication, we know kids are sponges. They take in everything, they watch what we say and listen to everything. In terms of communications, no matter adults or kids, something like between 75 to 90% of what people take in is what they see. They listen, they hear what you say, but they really watch you. They are watching. And it's important to and you've got sons too. I mean, every guy is different. Some are more comfortable with their tears, some are less. A lot of women I know, they're, like I said, in my family, the men were the criers. If you saw the women start crying, you start running. What?
But that's not a bad thing, though. That's not.
No, it's not. It's not. It's just different personalities. But I think it is so important for dads to pass along to their sons that we and this is part of mental health in general, and emotional health and spiritual health for all of us, and definitely for men in our society in general, and oftentimes for Black men too, sometimes even more so, that tears are cleansing. They're a human thing. It doesn't mean you're required to like cry on command. If you don't feel like it, that's fine. But that it's okay, and it's a healthy thing, and all of that. So I really think that in that parenting journey, the things that we model and want to model for our kids are very healing for ourselves as well, for parents as well as those kids. So that's my not ever short answer on God's green earth. Ever. We're going to go back on 5.
Thank you, Dr. Angie. That was a great answer. Now you packed in a lot, so I'm gonna try to unpack this just a little bit.
Oh,
So
okay.
you are right. It is traumatizing to watch it again. And we often hear from people who will say, I can't watch the trial, or I don't want to see the video because I don't want to be traumatized again.
Mm-hmm.
I think the majority or the society at large is understanding when the verdict, before the verdict came down, people kept saying, if you have Black friends, go give them a hug, offer them a drink, go sit and pray with them, or hold them as they cry because we're not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people are starting to understand that the
Mm-hmm.
pain. I do agree with you that George Floyd was a public lynching. Um, in the metaphorical sense, it wasn't an actual physical lynching. However, we saw him die on
Mm-hmm.
television under the control of authorities. And we know that
Mm-hmm.
from slavery times, oftentimes, or even just post slavery, when we were in Reconstruction, those are things that would happen. You would have mobs of white men who would come and
Mm-hmm.
say that you had done something, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to prove whether or not you had done it or not. It was their word against yours, and you were
Mm-hmm.
lynched. Um,
Absolutely.
I think it's also important for people to understand their triggers and understand how to deal with that. Personally, for myself, one of the things that I've done for that we've done as a family together, we have
Mm-hmm.
talked about it. My sons have said, well, mommy, why are people racist? And I say, you know what? I can't give you an exact answer. I can tell you some facts, some different
Mm-hmm.
things. However, if you're ever called this, you're not that. You are a child of God.
Mm-hmm.
You come from our family, and this is what our family is about. And you are getting educated. You get to do this, this. I said, all the things that you do are what make you who you are.
Mm-hmm.
I said, it is scary. I said, unfortunately, there's not a lot that we can do about it. I said, if we find ourselves in that situation, we have to get through it the best way that we can, which is everybody remain calm, do what we have to do. And then if
Mm-hmm.
something goes wrong, we got to survive it so we can fight it about it in court later. As honestly, and I always tell kids, my children, we pray about everything. So, and we haven't had that issue, and
Mm-hmm.
which is a blessing. However, I know that
Yes.
as my children get older and start to drive and they are on their own, because I
Mm-hmm.
have giant children, I know that there will be people, because there are people that look at my son now who's 12 and will say he's 16. And I'm like, no, he's 12. And once you hear him, you're like, he's really tall. I'm like, yes, he is. They're like, oh,
Yeah.
you got a future basketball player in your hand. I'm like, okay, great, thank you. But don't look at him as a threat. And that becomes the conversation. But then we have to have the conversation so that you
Mm-hmm.
understand that he's not a threat. And the
Yeah.
problem for most of us, we would rather have the conversation than someone making an assumption. And a lot of times what we see is the assumption.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But I want to pivot for a minute because there's a show that is on Amazon. It's
Mm-hmm.
called Them. And
Oh
Them
yeah.
Them is a horror story about a Black family that moves into a all white neighborhood which happens to
Mm-hmm.
be haunted. Now, you might think, "Oh, that's a cool plot." There's a whole lot of racial stuff that happens in there, that a lot of it we've read about in history books, we've read about
Mm-hmm.
from different personal accounts. It covers the Great Migration when descendants of slaves and Black folk
Mm-hmm.
were moving from different parts of the South all over the country. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a particular episode which a lot of people, when we saw this episode, many people said, "Trigger, trigger." And I don't want to go into what the episode is, but I want you to go back and talk a little bit about, you said oftentimes if you're not present during the primary activity,
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, watching it, can be just as traumatizing. And I'll be very
Absolutely.
honest, watching the episode, I
Mhm,
remember I had to take a breath and had to just decompress for a moment because it was heavy.
mhm,
And the writers of the show, they were like, he, the writer said, I had a dream about it. I knew I
mhm,
had to put it in the show. It fit for the horror. It does.
mhm,
However, it is so difficult to watch.
mhm,
And what do you think about Hollywood taking racial incidents and
mhm.
turning them into horror, oftentimes not necessarily making it fun, but it's for our
Mhm.
viewing pleasure?
Wow, you are a writer. That's a deep question. I love those kinds of questions. Um, well, you're a writer, you're a deep thinker.
Yes.
Um, well, that's I love that question. Okay, so I want to start with this. Um, I'm going to start with Hollywood. Hollywood. Okay, Hollywood. First
Mhm,
of all, as we, many of us know,
mhm,
is traditionally at least several steps behind the times of
mhm,
what's going on in the world.
mhm,
And that is often manifested in the way that they handle racial anything,
mhm,
in Hollywood,
mhm,
up to, up to and including Will Smith, Eddie Murphy, some of these people that we consider like blockbuster,
mhm,
guaranteed, big movie dollar actors.
mhm,
How very, very recently. And actually, yeah, like literally in the last year, a couple of years or so, as far as what I've heard, and what these actors have shared, Hollywood is still behind the times, thinking that predominantly Black movies don't make,
mhm.
Black movies, meaning predominantly Black casts, do not make money, audiences, only Black folks are going to see them, even though this has been disproven
Mhm,
over and over again.
mhm.
So, that as a starting point, Hollywood uh, is racist, has been racist.
Yeah.
A lot of Black actresses and actors, have spoken out about it, all of that. The recent Oscars, they were saying it was the most diverse, et cetera, Um, so they finally kind of like taken a few steps, and they've been called on it
Mhm,
enough times publicly to start making some changes. So having said that, like as a the groundwork of what we're dealing with, the milieu, the environment we're talking about,
mhm,
I have to, well, I don't have to, but I'll say on the one hand, I kind of give kudos a little bit. One part of my answer is I'm glad to see more, a greater breadth of
mhm,
storytelling
mhm,
coming out of Hollywood,
mhm,
that includes Black stories.
mhm,
Whereas, like I said, for too long, even right up until recently, there were just a few narrow niches for Black actors, according to the thinking in Hollywood's mind. You had to be
mhm.
certain shade, couldn't be too dark, couldn't,
Yeah.
and if you, no matter what color you're the maid, all that kind of stuff.
Mhm,
Can't make big box office. So, on one part of my answer is, um, I appreciate the attempt to include more diverse stories,
mhm,
because I mean, at bottom line, on the business side, they're there to make money,
mhm.
but on the artistic side, they're also supposed to be, acting is about storytelling. That's the
Yeah.
purpose of acting.
Yeah.
They're telling stories.
Mhm,
So I think that shows some kind of progress,
mhm,
some kind of movement. Okay, having said that, um, I'm familiar with the show that you're talking about. I admit I haven't watched it. I think I don't want to watch it because of
mhm,
the trick. It's some stuff just like painful to watch. Although it's important to be informed, of
mhm,
course.
mhm,
But having said that, I think my opinion is that there is a responsibility
mhm,
not to. It's a fine line. and too often Hollywood doesn't make this decision, in my opinion, as they should responsibly. But a storytelling in and of itself is not always licensed to put just everything on the screen. And I feel like that some things are yes, they can be triggering. Hollywood is not the great psychologist or psychiatrist. It's not their responsibility to, necessarily to try to go through the audits and figure out what's triggering, what's not. But it makes me wary and ask some questions about why they put it up there. I hate to be skeptical, but I want to be a little suspicious. And what I mean by that is, okay, yes, you're telling a greater diversity of stories, but you are also, at bottom line, a moneymaker. So one of the questions that I have is, so somewhere, not to paint them as one monolith, because there are some different thinking, in terms of producers or whatever. I don't know. I don't know enough about who put this out, all of the players behind who put it out, but I am wary, because I want to know. I have found this also. I'm wondering how much the powers that be, who green light films and TV and stuff, how much they found out that Black bodies do sell.
Yes.
Black, gratuitousness, sells. You said, in your own words, you were saying, it's horror, it's not, at least the scene, what you were talking about, it's not necessarily for entertainment. Okay, see, that's my next question of Hollywood. But
it's
is it
central to the plot? It's central to the plot. It is. And it's written by two Black writers, and I believe there is a Black director. I don't know how much in terms of Black staff are part of the project, but the scene, the way that it's done very well. And so I like horror, and I've watched a lot of horror, and the scene for me ranked up there with some of the obscure torture porn movies that came out in the 70s. And Dr. Angie, I don't know if you'll even know what this movie is, but there's a movie called The Last House on the Left. And that was about someone breaking into someone's house and torturing and almost killing somebody, and people going on revenge because they hurt this person. There's another movie, I can't remember the name of it, but it's another one of those obscure horror movies where a woman, she's a writer, she goes up to some cottage and some crazy people break in and assault her and leave her for dead, and she comes back and she takes revenge. This scene echoed that for me. However, because it's a haunted house story, ghost story, it makes sense why this scene is particularly important. And the showrunner said he had a question with the powers that be that wanted to greenlight, because they thought it was too gratuitous, and he said, we have to, because I have to be honest to the characters into their story. So I do agree with you. I think it is a very fine line. However, it can still be triggering if you're not prepared for it. And because it's in the middle of the series, it's episode 5. For those that want to watch them,
so you're already in it.
Yep, right. You're already in it. So start at the beginning, but when you get to episode 5, you're like, wow, because it's just hard to watch.
But that bring, okay, for me, I tend to and this is what I do, just like in general. I on the one hand, I always want to, I'm always wanting to know. Curious mind, want to know. On the other hand, it's just like with the George Floyd video. Thankfully, my job does not require me to see over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
I know it was important that the jury see it
Mm-hmm.
and see all the different parts, but I was like, I can't watch.
Yeah.
You know, I need to leave. I just really need to leave the room.
Mm-hmm.
It's painful to watch, and it's important that people understand the pain. But I've, in terms of your question about the Hollywood and the scene and all that, I just generally speaking,
Mm-hmm.
I generally, because I like horror too. I love good suspense. I love, you know, all that. Even throwing a little gore so we know there was a blood or whatever. But I personally, in my own personal opinion, I do tend to walk on the line of I really don't necessarily need to see every single stab.
Yes, I agree.
And I don't and I personally I personally do not feel that it is spiritually or psychologically necessarily healthy
Mm-hmm.
to spend a lot too much time watching somebody be tortured.
Yeah.
um, I think I understand that it is an important, it's important to understand what's going on. The oftentimes it can be important. I don't know this scene you're talking about. I don't watch that show, but from the way you described it, to protect the viewers who may have not seen it, of course, um, I get there. You know, I get the impression that and because a lot of times Hollywood does this often as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's important not just for you to know it happened,
Yes.
but it's important for you to know just how devastating it was so that you can then understand
Mm-hmm.
why the revenge.
Mm-hmm.
My response to that is Hitchcock
Yes. Mm-hmm. He did it very well.
did it very well, did not have to show every
Mm-hmm.
single. For me, I do think that there is a line where the scene can be included for the story, but you can include it, but even in including it, I still feel there's a line that you cross where I feel it becomes gratuitous. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't have to see all of that.
Mm-hmm.
I just and frankly, to be quite honest, not to take anything away from other artists, this is just my opinion. To
Mm-hmm.
be quite honest, I think that it requires more of the storyteller to do a Hitchcockian thing.
Yes.
Nothing was lost in the storytelling. You knew exactly what was going on,
Mm-hmm.
and there were no gaps in the story
Mm-hmm.
as it was spun,
Mm-hmm.
simply because you didn't see. See, I have an issue with do I need to see the 20th knife wound? Do I have to see the 15th one to understand? I got it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a horrible thing that took place. You know, see that to me is when I feel like I just don't feel that's healthy.
And
The only reason the only time this is a broad statement, but the only time I think it's healthy is, and that's painful to watch as well. There was an Easter church near us up the street
mm-hmm.
a couple of years ago. They did an amazing Easter Sunday thing with visuals and all kind of whatever. And my mom and my husband and I went, never gone to the church before. And I mean, they broke it like what they filmed. They did a film as well as live actors and all kinds of stuff. And the Jesus beating was like,
Wow.
wow. I mean, like, yes, it's like, wow. Okay, so like for that, I can understand why, like, you know, humans we don't understand. Like
Mm-hmm.
let's just go over that, just what we're talking about here. Like,
Right.
okay, and that was hard to watch.
Yeah.
But beyond that, there's my own little parameters, right? But generally speaking, like beyond that, again, do I need to see the 20 seconds? Do I need to see the 10th rape to get it? Like I got it. I
Mm-hmm.
find that painful to watch, and I wonder what damage that does here. Like I don't
Yes.
why am I inflicting what?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And I agree with you because that's what it felt like. It felt like, okay, now we understand what the story is because it was a lot of flashbacks. And then when you actually see it and it is an entire episode, it's like,
It's
ooh,
too much. It's
it
just
was
too
too,
much.
it was,
It's too much. And I
yeah.
didn't see it, just hearing you describe. It's too much. I did artists, you know, artists to the ones, you know, to these
Mhm.
gentlemen who are doing their work. And I understand he had a dream and he had to, if he's following his artistic bent, I feel that it's just too much.
But I think what's important, which is what you said, Is it healthy for you? Is it good for you? And I think people
Mhm.
have to figure that out, because for some people it doesn't bother them. And,
Mhm.
not going into why it doesn't, but for those that it bothers, you have to understand that and know what your triggers are. And if that's your trigger,
Mhm.
just call it for what it is. I can't watch it. And it was the same thing for me during the Derek Chauvin trial. They showed
Mhm.
the body cam footage from every angle, all the
They
video
sure
footage
did.
from in the store from every angle. And after a while, I got to the point, okay, I've seen this 5 times
Mhm.
today. I don't want to see it again, because
Mhm.
I can feel my spirit going down. So those are important
Yeah,
things.
absolutely. It's a self-protective thing. It's self-preservation, and it is important.
Hmm.
It is important, and it has nothing to do, like we've talked about it, in other episodes of your show. Um, you're still strong. It doesn't. It's not an indication of weakness. Um, uh, everyone's different, and it is important, exactly as you say, for us to know our triggers, or learn about them. And if you need to step away, it doesn't make you weak in any way. It means that you understand where your lines are, and that is taking care of yourself.
Hmm.
That's a healthy step, taking care of yourself, I feel like.
So here's our last question, Dr. Angie. So for people who have a trigger where if
Mhm.
they see a police officer, they are immediately fearful. Because I
Yeah.
didn't understand this years ago when I would encounter people in community work and they would say, "Oh, I don't call the police because they cause more
Mhm.
trouble than it's worth." And I would
Mhm.
say, "But the police are here." And they'd be like, "Not where I grew up, not
Mhm.
not my interactions." So now
Yeah.
that we've seen video after video after video, what advice would you give someone who's dealing with that and is trying to remain calm and mentally strong, but just struggling with the fear itself of police in general?
Yeah. That's a real. It's a real thing. Um, and when I say a real thing, I mean it's a real thing, but I also mean, just as you say, um, I too, same thing. I've heard people say that, down through the years. Uh, hadn't been a personal experience of mine like that,
Mhm.
but it's so much, uncovered even more so for all of us,
Mhm.
that, I same thing. It's like extra prayers.
Mhm.
Um, wow. I mean, what one thing I would say, it's really kind of like the same general formula, and by the formula I mean, um, the threat feels like the police or some police.
Mhm.
And so this, when I say formula, I mean the same advice that I would give about, any of these other things.
Mhm.
Um, you know, some of the things you already said, first and foremost, having that talk with our kids is to allow an opportunity to sort of practice, to
Mhm.
know, what to do. So it's the same thing for ourselves in our own heads, mentally. Um, that's one thing. um being aware that anxiety is going to come up, or may likely come up, so that you know how to handle anxiety of any kind that comes up. You take your deep breaths, you remind yourself to stay calm,
Mhm.
because no matter what the situation, panic always makes it worse.
Yes.
So, to stay calm. Um, that's one thing. A second thing is, and I've heard officers say this as well. Um, some good officers, because there are lots of good ones out there. Um, have a plan in terms of your network and your contacts.
Mhm.
So this is true. That's why I say kind of same formula a little bit for safety.
Mhm.
Even if it's not a non-officer type of situation, no matter how old you are, man or woman, let your best friend know, leave a message somewhere. People need to know where you are in the world. You're like, where are you going, kind of thing. So that is true also, in terms of thinking about being fearful. I'm getting ready to go out, and it's evening, and I'm going to make a drive, whatever. People, a couple, two, three people need to know where I am and where I'm going.
Mhm.
Um, that can help allay some nervousness a little bit, because you feel like you're not out there just by yourself.
Mhm.
Third thing is, if you got, logistics, basics, kind of like always keep your phone charged if you can, have a charger on you, because phones got helped to get Chauvin convicted.
Yes.
Phones are helping to wake up a large swath of the population, oftentimes not in the Black community or white community, to see that this stuff really goes on. And so, I know if I'm out with, my husband or something, and it was nighttime, we pull lights in the back and pulled over. First thing we did, I was going to be out. First thing we did, besides calling on the Lord, as we always do, it'll be fine. See what the Lord is going to do. Call my friend Cindy, click, click, click. You in prayer? Police is pulling us over. Be all right. Okay. Somebody somewhere knows, keep them on the phone, whatever that is. So you feel like you're not out there by yourself. And I would also say too, really good officers who really care can't stand bad officers who are making them look bad. Can't stand this racist nonsense. It's important to say that too. I mean, white, officers of color who really care about their work and care about the community. They hate this stuff. They hate the way it makes them look. They can't, so maybe I would end with, while we're recognizing that this is much more prevalent than one or two bad apples, it's still good to keep in mind that it's not every officer. There are still good officers out there. Maintaining calm, taking your deep breaths, making sure your community knows where you are. And maybe that's more than one or two people, whatever, to feel that you got, some support around you. I think all of those things can be some steps, as we keep working on it. As we keep, as a consultant, I've done some work with police chiefs, et cetera. And I believe I'm going to be doing some more of that work coming up also. That's kind of in the works. So while we work on it on the consulting end and try to do a better job of helping people understand who are in policing, what needs to change, citizens, each one of us, I think, can continue to support each other, lift each other up, be vocal about it, make sure that, people know where we are. Don't panic. Panic makes everything worse.
That's right.
And be aware, but expect that it's going to be a good outcome.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And tell those stories too. Tell those stories too. It is real, but my husband's come home like so many times down through the years about how he's been stopped and just prayed about it before he opened his mouth. And next thing you know, the white officer is trying to have prayer with him or whatever the case. So that stuff is real as also. So we want to tell more of all those stories. I think it's scarier now. Well, it is scary now because it's prevalent. It may be an uptick, or maybe we're seeing and hearing more of it. All that's scary, but and it's important, but it's not the full story. Exactly. Also. So that's important to remember. Otherwise we sink down into paralysis, and we don't want to do that either.
Right. We got to keep moving forward. That
Absolutely.
is a great way to end our show tonight. Thank you, Dr. Angie, for coming in and breaking all of this down. Now, tell us where we can find you, how we can listen to your music, and purchase your books.
Thank you so much for asking. You're always very kind. I'm going to not lie to your beautiful audience. First of all, happy anniversary. I forgot. Happy anniversary. Yes. I wanted to start with it. 1 year of the Kim B. Davis show. Let's applaud her.
Thank
you. Excellent. Yes. I was joking with you before we got on air here, before we started recording, that it took me a year to finally write out, right? So I don't forget anything. I mean, you always ask, you're so kind, hilarious. And I, tell you some stuff. It's like, oh, I forgot. Okay, so on the psychology side of things, as you already shared with everyone, I am the president of the Michigan Psychological Association Foundation Board. So you can look that up. Find out some things that we're involved in and doing some, we're a board, so we fund, wonderful things in the community. So there's that, number one. I'm also president of AMA and Associates Incorporated, a counseling, consulting, and coaching company. We are based in Detroit, Michigan, but we are, you know, we're all virtual. So we have clients from everywhere around the country, around the world. And so we, as my sister and myself, and occasionally we have associates who come on with us. And I do personal and professional coaching. I also do dissertation coaching as well. So I help folks who are, if you're working on your dissertation, doctoral dissertation, do all that good stuff. And and we're about to start a power coaching group for women about reclaiming our voice. So we're about to start that. So go to amaassociates.com to see the programs we offer, to get on my calendar if you want to do a discovery call to find out if coaching with me might be helpful for you. So that's some stuff going on there. My book is called Freedom: What is the Experience of Living Without Negative Self-Imposed Limitations? Advertising. It is it's research that I did, and it's just got some wonderful themes for getting unstuck, no matter your background, no matter your gender, or no matter what you're stuck with, personal, professional, whatever it may be. It's got some really good tips for getting from stuckness to unstuckness that are applicable, you know, on all walks of life. So you can get the book from Ex Libris. That's XLIB. Okay, let me spell it right. It's XL. I wrote it down and I'm saying off the top of my head. I was ready. Hold a moment. Okay, it's XLIBRIS, Ex Libris. I think that's correct. .com. So yeah. look for my book there under Dr. Angela Celeste May. And then musically, Celeste Productions. I'm president of Celeste Productions as well. I teach voice and piano. And you can find, I've got 2 CDs out, so you can find both of my CDs at reverbnation.com. That's reverbnation.com, and then go to the site and look for Angela Celeste May. And you can also look for the second album, Reintroducing the Lady, on Amazon.com. And very exciting news, a movie called Solomon. Yes, a movie that I am in with my my band, which includes my brother Leon Dale May on drums. It was a Detroit filmed film by excellent filmmaker J.B. Armstrong. It's a fantastic story also, and it's award-winning. It is award-winning. So I appear in that and sing in that in a the major gala scene. So that is now, as of the last couple of days, widely available on all the platforms: Amazon, Dish, Comcast. So Solomon, that's the movie. So it's an excellent movie. So that's what's going on there. And then in terms of where you can find me, of course, amaassociates.com. On Twitter, Celeste, CelesteMus. So that's Celeste MUS, and that's Twitter. You can, every place else on social media, just look up Dr. Angela Celeste May. That's Facebook, that's YouTube, that's Instagram. So that's me at the moment. So far, I've always got projects going on and stuff, but that's me.
So much exciting things happening, and congratulations. I am so proud of you and so happy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great things happening. Thank you again for being on the Kim B. Davis Show. We look forward to seeing you next month, where we'll be talking about another exciting topic, I'm sure.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Kim B. Davis Show. You know, you can find me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, TikTok, LinkedIn, pretty much everywhere. And it's Kimberly Batchelor Davis. Bachelor is spelled BATCHELOR. You can see the Kim B. Davis Show on youtube.com/Kimberly Batchelor Davis. You can find out more about me as an author and see all of my books at kimbdavis.com. You can also listen to this show on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, and Google. And thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you on the next show. And as always, remember, be magnificent.